Okay, everyone, welcome to the round 2 of Protecting Landscapes from Drought presentation. I am your host, Emmett Minnick, and before we get started on drought, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself, who I am, and why I have any business trying to educate people on drought and landscapes. I have been with Arborjet for 4 years. I am the South Central Technical Manager. I live in the Dallas area, and I cover Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Kansas, and Missouri. So all areas that deal with drought stress. I also used to cover Arizona, which is where I took this picture with the national champion Fremont Cottonwood. Prior to working with Arborjet, I spent 4 years as a plant healthcare manager at a Dallas area tree care company. I was also the jack at that company. And what the jack is, that's that guy that just kind of does everything. So PHC was my primary duties, but I also ground stumps, drag brushed, climbed trees, would be a substitute crew leader if somebody was quote-unquote sick. So in the tree care world, I've really done it all, and I enjoy working with trees. I became a certified arborist in 2011, and recently, at the end of 2017, I took the test to become a board-certified master arborist, and so that's really cool. My wife tells me I'm a super tree nerd now. My educational background is in agronomy and crop science. I have a master's degree in crop science. And so my education is really geared towards crops and soils and pesticides and fertilizers and growing things. But when I started working with trees, I found that's really my second passion. And so what I do now with Arborjet, I kind of combine my two passions, and I really love what I do. I get to travel across my region and help people with trees and their businesses and things like that. As I'm out and about, I do like to find big trees. That's something I find kind of fun to do. And so this is the biggest tree I found, so I like to throw this picture up there. It's the national champion Fremont Cottonwood. It's in the middle of nowhere in Arizona. That tree's like 12 feet in diameter. And so if I'm lucky, I get to find big trees. This was the best selfie I've ever taken. I had my phone propped up on a fence post with a timer. I was running back and forth until I got a good picture. So I like to find big trees, and if I'm lucky, I get to find some big ash trees. A little tree humor there for you folks, but I think I'm going to have to come up with some new material because I got about a half dozen webinars with that joke. So maybe next time I'll figure something else funny to say. So jumping into drought, there is a drought monitor that's put out. I think it's updated once a week. This is the map from last week. They probably got a new one today. And you can see kind of the usual suspects for drought stress are happening, except we're up in the New England area. You can see that is in moderate, abnormally dry and moderately droughty up in New England. But as you move down to the South Central region, like I said, all the states that I cover are in pretty bad drought. You get out to Arizona, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, that area is definitely suffering. And then even on the West Coast, California is no stranger to drought. Oregon, that is getting pretty dry up there too. So lots of reasons for concern. Drought really impacts a lot of different things. More than folks realize. Not only is drought bad, but so is heat. So this was the forecast in DFW recently. I took a picture of my television. So we had highs. These are highs that I would expect to see out in Arizona, that 106, 107, 108. Not normal temperatures for DFW. Extremely hot. And compound that with the drought that we're in right now, that's really, really stressful on all the different plant material and animals and people too. I was trying to find some slides about the economic impact of drought as it pertains to the green industry. I couldn't find anything like that in my research, but I did find some material to put a number on things. Those of you from Texas, you can remember back in 2011, back in 2011 was a very extreme drought. And what I found on the left-hand column, it says losses in Texas from the drought in 2011 were estimated to be approximately $8.4 billion. That is a ton of money. A lot of that's going to be related to cropping, but for the most part, you just had a lot of losses from the drought. Same thing in California. Economic impact, $2.7 billion from the 2015 drought. Most of that from cropping. What's interesting is the amount of jobs that were lost out in California, 21,000 jobs. Seasonal laborers, that was 10,000 of that. And so just a huge economic impact, all from being in a drought setting. I'm getting some messages popping up here. Okay. All right, folks, welcome to round 2 of Protecting Landscapes from Drought. I'm your host, Emmett Minnick. Before we get started talking about drought, I'd like to introduce myself to you and tell you who I am and why I have any business talking to you about trees and drought and landscapes. I've been with Arborjet for 4 years. I am the South Central Technical Manager. I cover Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Kansas, and Missouri, so all states that deal with drought on a regular basis. Prior to starting with Arborjet, I was the plant healthcare manager / jack at a Dallas area tree care company. And being a jack at a company, that means you get to do a little bit of everything. And so I was a stump grinder, substitute crew leader, I've drag brush, climbed trees, bid work, sold work, diagnosed, tree inventories, you name it. I've kind of been involved in it in the tree care world. I became a certified arborist back in 2011, and most recently at the end of 2017, I took the test to become a board-certified master arborist. My wife likes to tell me that I'm a super tree nerd now. My educational background, I have a bachelor's degree in agronomy and a master's degree in crop science. And so my schooling was all involved in plant and soil sciences, growing things, pesticides, fertilizers. But when I found out my passion about trees, now with Arborjet, I've kind of combined my two working passions, and I really love what I do. I get to travel around, help people with their businesses, and help them out with plant health care and diagnosis and tree care in general. It's a lot of fun. And so when I'm out and about, I like to find some big trees. This is the biggest tree I've ever found. This is a national champion Fremont cottonwood out in Skull Valley, Arizona. It's the best selfie I've ever taken. Stuck my phone up on a fence post and was running back and forth until I got a good picture. And so finding big trees is fun, but every once in a while, you get to find a big ash tree. Little tree humor there for you folks. But with a half dozen webinars on the same joke, I think I've got to get some new material. So here's our drought monitor. This was from about a week ago. And you can see it's sort of the usual suspects, like South Central region I was talking about, Utah, Arizona, Colorado, the West Coast into California, Oregon, Washington. Interesting enough, the kind of New England area. You've got Massachusetts, New York, Maine, Vermont, Delaware up there, all dealing with drought. And that's not something I don't think they're too used to in those areas. Not only is drought stressful to our landscape, so is the heat. And so these are some record-setting heats you can see on my screenshot here for Thursday and Friday of last week. DFW was up 107, 108. Those are extremely high temperatures for this area. We're no strangers to triple digits, but once you get into 107, 108, it's very, very hot, stressful to turf, trees, shrubs, people, and animals too. If you look in the bottom right of that photo, it's at 10:20 at night, and it's still 95 degrees outside. So it's just very, very hot, and when it gets like that, it hardly has time to cool off, which is really important. As I was putting this together, I was wanting to find some information regarding like economic impact of drought on the green industry. I couldn't find exactly what I was looking for, but I found some economic impacts of drought. This is from the Texas's record drought back in 2011. It was just miserably dry and hot throughout the entire summer that year. And it's estimated to have caused $8.4 billion worth of economic loss to the state. And that's a huge number, billion with a B. And so a lot of that's going to be from agricultural losses. I'm not expecting you to read this whole thing. I just wanted to point out that drought does have a huge economic impact. Same thing in California. This slide is from their 2015 drought, looking at $2.7 billion in losses, over 21,000 jobs lost, 10,000 directly related to seasonal workers, and then crop revenue loss was $900 million. So it's a big impact just from having no rainfall. This is the current California drought monitor. One of the people on here was saying they're from Riverside, California. And so that's kind of what California is looking like right now. When I was out in LA earlier this year, I found this on the mirror in my bathroom. Let's conserve water for drought-stricken California. Shorten your showers, turn off the tap when you brush your teeth, reuse your towels. So people in California are well aware of the problems. And a lot of that has to do with the population of an area. I know in DFW, water is kind of the limiting factor for our growth as a city. And the same thing is happening in Los Angeles. You need water to sustain a human population. And so in California, water stewardship is even being put up in the hotels. So people are well aware of the problem. As you get into other areas, it's not so well advertised, and I actually think Texas could probably do a better job of that. Before we start talking too much about water, I wanted to spend just 2 slides on soils. This is really a 30,000-foot view. Here is what your typical soil profile should look like. So on the top, you have the organic horizon. Below that, you have the A horizon, the B horizon, and you get to the C and the bedrock. So that is what a normal soil profile should look like. However, what this presentation is geared to, drought management in the landscape, it's important to know that this is not what your soil looks like. So what we are more than likely dealing with is a result of what this picture is showing on the right. You've got urban soils that are compromised due to fill dirt, you got compaction, chemical spills, removal of organic matter, road salts, salt fertilizers and herbicides, improper irrigation practices, asphalt, concrete, construction, and all of this can lead to difficulties, one of which is a perched water table. And so this is what a profile from an urban soil looks like. So if you see right below the turf grass, you have what normal looking soil would look like. And that's predominantly because that sod was brought in with an inch or so of soil. And so typically on a new home installation, the turf grass will put that down and it'll survive and look okay. The trees that they plop in the ground will live for a little bit and then they'll start declining. You know, what is happening in these situations, here's a good example of when fill dirt was brought in to grade out these lots. You can see right below where that sod line would be, you have what looks to be like a C horizon of the soil. That is not good growing material. And then below that, you have kind of this gray area, which is another horizon of soil. And then below that, you get to a more clay-looking soil, which is probably the top soil at a time. And so what happens when you have these different soil profiles interacting with each other is you get what's called a perched water table, where essentially what that means is as water infiltrates through the ground, it's going to fill up that top, kind of that orange-looking horizon first. It's going to fill up that whole area before it even begins to percolate downward, if it can, because that soil there looks very, very compacted from all the construction equipment. And so when you're dealing with urban soils, things have to be done differently. And you've got to think about what's going on below ground before you just start trying to pour more water on things. Maybe doing some type of an aeration or air spading or core aeration or something like that might be very beneficial to you. Okay, so here's my simple math equation to help understand drought stress. So what is it? Well, drought stress is when water loss is exceeding water uptake. So in the simple equation, you have water uptake. So the soil water is being absorbed through a healthy root system, and then you're losing water through transpiration, and so that nets the plant available water. The drought is occurring when water loss exceeds the water uptake, causing a deficit in plant available water. It's very simple. I took this slide out of my chlorosis webinar, and if any of you have watched that, I put this law of minimum as it pertains to nutrient availability. And what this law of minimum is saying is that crop yield or plant health is always dictated by the lowest common denominator, basically. So what is the most limiting factor? All right, and so sometimes the most limiting factor can be a plant nutrient. But in the case of drought, water is the most plant limiting factor. You could have the most rich soil in the world, but without water, that plant can't do anything with it. And so this is illustrated by this, this barrel with rungs at different heights. And if you look on the left-hand side, water is at one of those rungs. And so what happens when you get into a drought stress, that water becomes the most limiting factor. All the rest of the stuff that you're doing is for nothing. If you're out taking care of turf grass and you're putting down a slow-release nitrogen fertilizer during the middle of the summer, that's not helping you at all, okay? The plant can't do anything without water. All right, so moving on, what are some symptoms of the drought stress? Well, there's several different symptoms, and it has to do with different stages of drought. The first stage is called acute deficit. And those of you who garden perhaps some tomatoes, you're going to see acute deficit on your tomato plants nearly every single day. As you get to the hotter part of the day, the leaves look like this. They get nice and curled up and wilty. And that is a drought response mechanism. It helps the plants try to conserve some water when the leaves roll up like that. But by and large, they just look kind of sad. And as the day passes, the tomatoes will rehydrate at night, and you look at them in the morning, and the leaves will be nice and perky and turgid again. If that acute deficit were to continue, if you didn't add more water to our equation, then you're going to enter what's called the permanent wilting point. And the permanent wilting point, the definition of that is when a plant is in drought stress, water is added back to the equation, but that plant is unable to rehydrate within a 12-hour period. And so when you get to that permanent wilting point, you're going to start to see the desiccation or drying out of leaves, which is what this little red oak picture is illustrating here. As that permanent wilting point continues, you're going to get into what's called chronic deficit. That photo on the right is a pear tree, not too far from my home. You can look at the landscape picture in that photo. That's Bermuda grass that's all gone dormant already due to drought, and that pear tree is following suit. It's beginning to show some fall color, and it's basically shutting down for the year. So you have acute deficit, permanent wilting point, chronic deficit. For tree care, you can have multi-year drought stress, where these plants or these trees will just hang on and for several years in very low soil moisture conditions. And some symptoms of that, what you might see is some bark splitting. Essentially what's happening here is the cells inside the tree are actually shrinking and constricting to the point where the bark will split apart. And typically what you'll see with that is some oozing. A lot of people will say it looks like wood borer activity. A good way to figure that out is to take a chisel and actually chisel that area of bark out of the tree and see if there's a wood borer under there. A lot of the times it's just the bark splitting open due to severe drought. You'll also see branch tip dieback, like this photo showing. When trees get drought stressed in a chronic state, they are very susceptible to secondary pathogens like wood borers and different canker diseases, and you'll always see this branch tip dieback. And eventually, if you don't get any water back into that equation, your trees are going to die. So we all talk about drought stress like, oh yeah, it's dry, there's no water, right? But we don't really think about what's happening internally to the tree's physiology, or what's happening below ground. And so I wanted to explain that a little bit. But what exactly is happening? Well, transpiration is exceeding water availability. Whenever the tree senses that that drought stress, it triggers an abscisic acid response. Now, abscisic acid, that's a hormone that's stored in the root system. Everything inside of a tree is controlled by plant hormones. And so abscisic acid, or ABA, is a drought hormone. And it controls the opening and closing of stomata. That's the pores in the leaf that are responsible for opening the stomate so the tree can transpire. And so when the tree senses that drought stress, it closes its stomates in an attempt to store water. When those stomates are closed, the tree is not photosynthesizing. And so if no water is added to the equation, those stomates are going to stay closed. And then the leaf tissue is going to desiccate or dry out, causing the wilt and eventual necrosis. Now that's what's happening above ground. So when you think about what's happening below ground, so there's no water in the soil for the tree to absorb. Well, below the ground, that's where the other half of the tree lives, right? So you have lots of roots and root hairs. Those root hairs begin to desiccate and dry out as well. And when those root hairs dry out and die, that makes the tree less capable of absorbing water in the future when it is added back to the equation. So when all this is going on and photosynthesis is not happening, the tree is no longer producing the proteins, the carbohydrates, the hormones, and other metabolites that it needs to survive. And those are all very important for the tree to have those to ward off these secondary invaders like wood borers. So what can you do about drought? Well, first thing, and that most people think about is, well, let's water our trees some more. Where I live, we're under watering restrictions currently. 1 day per week is when you can run your irrigation. However, you can hand water as much as you'd like, really. And so what most folks will do for trees or make recommendations for trees is using a soaker hose. You ring it around the tree, you turn that on and really soak that profile. I like to use a spot sprinkler that hooks onto my garden hose, and I'll just really saturate the area under my trees. Other things that can be done is to optimize irrigation systems and scheduling. Those of you who are licensed irrigators, great time to be doing your irrigation checks. You can see sprinkler inefficiency all over the yards around town right now, where you have sprinklers that just don't get 100% coverage. It's great to optimize that, make sure your controller is set properly. Those people that plant trees and shrubs, avoid it right now, because you're going to have a really difficult time making sure that tree or shrub or turf grass even is successful in the plantings. So beyond those cultural practices, there are some agronomic solutions out there for you, and that's what the bulk of this presentation is about. Recently, Arborjet acquired the controlling interest of a company called Ecologel Solutions. And one of the primary technologies that Ecologel is known for is a product called Hydrotame. Hydrotame is a unique blend of hygroscopic and humectic compounds. It's designed to manage soil moisture in between irrigation and rainfall. So what that means is it extends the availability of water in the soil. Now, Hydrotame is available as a couple of different formulations. You have the Hydrotame formulation, you have the Lesco Moisture Manager brand, and then also a brand called H3O. So these brands are available at different distributors. They're all the same thing. So Hydrotame was originally discovered and marketed as a dust suppressant. If you're around construction sites, you've always seen the big water tankers that are running around spraying the construction site in an effort to keep the dust down. Well, so what Hydrotain does, it actually acts like a magnet for water molecules, and so it was able to minimize dust in these areas. The original inventors of this technology then decided to try it on plant material. And so this is actually a photo of the first ever test plot of Hydrotain. And so it says this is in Australia during a 6-week drought period. And so that Hydrotain treated turf is doing a heck of a lot better than the unirrigated area. So how this technology works is it actually will coat the root system of the treated plants, be it turf grass, trees, shrubs, potted plants, flowers, whatever. It's actually going to coat that root system and act as a magnet for water molecules. So the soil is losing water through evaporation constantly. And in fact, drought happens every single day. Just like I was talking about with the tomatoes, they go through acute drought stress every single day. And so what this product does is it extends the availability of water. So as those water molecules, those individual H2O molecules are leaving the soil, Hydrotain is acting like a magnet. It is attracting those molecules to clump together and form a droplet. That droplet is then able to be absorbed by the plant, and Hydrotain goes right back to work attracting more molecules. So in this manner, it's able to extend the availability of water. And so what that means is, in an irrigation setting, for instance, if you have a lawn that's being watered 3 days per week, you could probably eliminate 1 full day of irrigation, and that lawn would be no worse for wear. We started working with the Hydrotain technology a couple of years ago when we released our soil-applied product, NutriRoot. What we did with NutriRoot is we took that humectant and surfactant component, which you can see in the bottom 2 bullet points. That's the Hydrotain component of NutriRoot. To that, we added seaweed extract, humic acid, iron, manganese, zinc, and a 223 fertilizer. So what NutriRoot is designed to do is to stimulate root development. If you remember me talking about that little tree, when the ground dries out, so do all those fine root hairs. And so what NutriRoot is designed to do is to stimulate that root development to come back and then hold water on those new roots. I referenced the 2015 drought in California. We have some photos from that year from one of our customers, and they were working on redwood recovery. And so they were using NutriRoot on this tree. Applications made June, July, and August. And you can see they just drenched around the base of that tree, probably 8 to 10 feet out. And so after a few treatments, they were beginning to see some recovery. And after 6 months, the tree had responded beautifully. This is a brief video showing what a single application of NutriRoot can do. So this is a time-lapse camera. The forsythias on the left-hand side were watered with NutriRoot. The forsythias on the right were just with regular water. And this is taking pictures every 30 minutes for a week. And so early on, you can already see that the forsythias on the right are beginning to wilt. And as that week progresses, those forsythias on the right begin to look pretty sad, and it's not until the end of the week that we're starting to see that acute drought deficit on the left-hand NutriRoot treated forsythias. So ideally, you'd want to use this technology prior to drought stress. And so this is a series of photos of Bermuda grass that's gone dormant due to drought and its recovery. So these are photos taken every 7 days. And so after a month, that lawn began to fill back in decent. once turf grass has gone dormant like that, it's really tough to bring it back around. And unfortunately with trees, if they get to that point where they're brown, you're probably not bringing them back. Here's another, this is a fescue lawn where they're spreading the granular version of hydrotane out there. And so this was several weeks later, and the lawn had recovered from that. Potted plants is another great use for hydrotane. Many uses for this stuff. Turf care, color installation, those of you who do flower installations, localized dry spots in lawns. I was talking about sprinkler inefficiency earlier. You have sandy soils, tree and shrub installations. That's huge. Those people that are planting trees right now are going to have a very hard time keeping those alive. This is a great tool to help protect that investment. I think sod and seed is a perfect application for hydrotane. I already mentioned the potted plants. Talking to my tree care customers, a lot of them have spring and fall feeding program in their plant health care program. This would be an opportunity to feed the trees with hydrotane in the summer months to help them withstand that drought. Again, going back to that law of minimum, the most limiting factor to that tree during the summer months is going to be water. And so this is a way to help that tree stay hydrated. And then also winter desiccation to landscape plants. This is really going to help with that for people that are up in the northern states where it gets really cold. I think it's important to mention that one application of hydrotane lasts for 90 days, so it's a 3-month product. As I mentioned, there are a couple of different formulations of hydrotane, the H3O and the Moisture Manager. It's also available as a liquid or granular. So the liquid is hydrotane ES+. That means it has a soil surfactant in the formulation that helps it penetrate into the soils. The rate on that is 6 ounces per 1,000 square feet, or 3 gallons per acre. If you want to feed a tree with that liquid product, it would be 4 to 6 ounces per inch diameter, and that's going to give you 3 months of drought stress alleviation. In the granular products, you have hydrotane QD, which means quick dissolve, and then you have the hydrotane OC, which is on an organic compost carrier. Essentially, it's a chicken poop carrier. And so those two products are applied at the same rate, 2.7 pounds per 1,000 square feet, or 3 bags per acre. I'm a fan of that hydrotane OC because with that chicken poop, you do get a little bit of a nutrient analysis. It's like a 3-4-3. And so that's going to give you turf or whatever you put it on a little bit of a bump. And it's also organic, which is a great buzzword to use anytime you're trying to sell a service. And so recommended on a turf application, you're looking at charging $10 to $15 per 1,000 square feet on these. So it's a nice add-on application, or even an application that you can use to replace your summer turf program. Okay, back to my simple equation here. What is drought stress? So we talked about water uptake, and that's where hydrotane and Nutriroot are really going to help on this side of the equation. It's going to make water more available or available longer, so that's going to help the water uptake. However, the real problem with drought is that your water loss is happening. You get into these really hot temperatures, and these plants and trees are transpiring at a very high rate, and you're losing a lot of water. So what if you could do something on that side of the equation? And that's where our product Shortstop comes into play. So Shortstop is a plant growth regulator. I'm going to geek out on you guys for a little bit here because my master's thesis work was done on growth regulators in cotton. That is not a picture of me, but it really illustrates the effects that PGRs can have on a crop. And so I mentioned earlier that hormones control everything inside of plants. Well, what PGRs are is they inhibit the synthesis of certain hormones. You have gibberellic acid, abscisic acid, auxins, cytokinins, ethylene. And these hormones control various different functions inside the plants. What we're really interested in is gibberellic acid. That is the hormone responsible for stem elongation. So shortstop, the active ingredient, is 22.3 paclobutrazol. Paclobutrazol has been around for many, many years. It is a soil-applied growth regulator. It's very useful in the tree care world. It has a lot of benefits to it besides just inhibiting tip growth. So you're going to enhance the fine root hair growth in trees. That's going to help you alleviate drought stress, and we're going to really dive into that a bit more. It's a great product to use in a construction project. And it's also really helpful if you have chlorotic trees. So into the modes and mechanisms here. This is where I said I'm going to geek out. So paclobutrazol inhibits the synthesis of gibberellic acid. Now GA is what's controlling that cell elongation. And so the tree or plant is still producing cells, it just stacks them all up. They can't elongate. And so when that GA pathway is blocked, it increases the production of other hormones inside the plant, including abscisic acid, which we talked about earlier. So abscisic acid is responsible for stomatal opening and closing that regulates the plant's water stress response. And so what happens when GA is blocked, the plant actually produces a much larger percentage of abscisic acid. And so they become the tree becomes hypersensitive to water stress. Again, still this side is very busy. It's still pretty high level stuff here. I just want you to focus on that red X where it says paclobutrazol. So this is a terpenoid pathway where gibberellic acid and abscisic acid are produced. We are essentially creating a roadblock to gibberellic acid, and so all that glucose energy that's coming in has to be diverted into other pathways. So additional benefits besides slowing down tip growth, you have increased production of root hairs. You have thicker leaf cuticles. When a tree has more root hairs, it has more ability to absorb water. When a tree has thicker leaf cuticles, it is more resistant to water loss. Same thing with more leaf hairs. Increased chlorophyll. That means the plant is able to produce more food for itself to get through those stressful periods. When you have smaller stomates, the tree can't lose as much water as quickly. Smaller leaves, the same thing. In additional carbohydrate storage, again, getting through those stressful periods in a tree's life, it needs those carbohydrates. So wow, all of these additional benefits from shortstop are actually drought-resistant mechanisms. So when you think about drought-tolerant trees, native species in your area, what do you think about? So in Texas, and actually all through the Southwest, mesquite is a really drought-tolerant tree. They have very small leaves. They also have a very vast root system. Same thing with a bald cypress. That's a very drought-tolerant tree. It has one of the most extensive root systems I've witnessed. Very small leaves. Locust is another one that comes to mind. So all of these benefits from shortstop help that tree to become more drought tolerant. Shortstop, this map is showing how long you can expect that product to last and get those that growth inhibition and the physiological effects. For most of the United States, it's a 3-year product. And so using shortstop as a drought tolerance tool, it's kind of your long-term tool, where Hydrotain and Nutriroot are short-term, helping with water availability. Utilizing shortstop gives you a 3-year efficacy, so that's your long-term solution. I like to help folks out when they are first beginning to use shortstop. The labeling and language can be a bit confusing. You need to mix this product with water, and it's always mixed up at a 1:11 dilution. So 1 part shortstop, 11 parts water. What I recommend is mixing up a master solution of RTU, that stands for ready to use. And so you can mix up 1 pint of shortstop into 11 pints of water, and that's going to give you 1.5 gallons. Other paclobutrazol products encourage you to mix up at the tree, and you have to measure out some obscure number of milliliters of paclobutrazol to some obscure number of milliliters of water. I discourage that. It's very confusing. Having managed plant healthcare technicians before in the past, any type of confusion, you really just want to avoid that, especially when it comes to shortstop, because you can over-apply this stuff and then you're going to be in trouble. So these rates are very specific, and it's so much easier if you just mix up a master solution of shortstop, and when you get out to your tree, you can just agitate that jug, get it mixed back up into solution, and then utilizing our ready-to-use rate chart here, it makes it very simple. Our bottom category, 150 milliliters per inch on this slide, that's where oak falls. Oak responds beautifully to paclobutrazol, and so 150 milliliters of ready-to-use formulation per inch. You find that category. If you look up at the top line, you can see our tree DBHs. So say you have a 17-inch oak tree, you just follow it out. You're going to use 2,550 milliliters of product. So essentially 2.5 liters of a ready-to-use mixed up shortstop solution. So that just cuts down on the math, makes it very simple to use shortstop. Different ways to apply shortstop. Basal drench is typically the most popular method of application. If you choose this method to apply, make sure you do a good job digging your trench out. Basically, that trench is, the reason you do that is to kind of dam up that solution and keep it focused right on the tree. Paclobutrazol is the strongest growth regulator on the market for anything. It will, if something grows, paclobutrazol will regulate it, including turfgrass. And so if you or your technician doesn't do a good job on the trench, that product has the ability to run and it will regulate the turf growth. So basically you dig that trench out, pour your amount of solution around the tree. Once it's absorbed into the soil, you just kick that dirt back around the tree or leave the root flare exposed, which is always good. Other application method would be using a soil injection rig. So this can inject the proper amount into the tree or into the soil. The picture on the left-hand side, that's using a high-pressure flow meter. For somebody that's doing a lot of this, that would be the tool to have. However, those flow meters are about $800, so it's not cheap. I saw this inject tool at a trade show. I thought it was cool. I thought it might work well. I don't have any experience with it other than I thought it looked cool. This is going to be a good method to use if you have a lot of trees to do. What I have found to be the best way to do it is to use a soil auger. So rather than digging a trench around the tree, just take your auger bit and drill several holes around the root flare of the tree. And then you can just pour the correct dosage evenly through your holes that you've drilled. And that gets it below the turf grass, so you don't have the instances of it running off. And it's just a lot easier to use an auger bit than to use a hand trowel. It's also going to be a lot cheaper method than buying a soil injection rig. I don't have a slide on it, but we're going to have a really cool tool coming out soon called the AccuFlow meter. And that could be a great tool to use in these paclobutrazol treatments. So a few photos regarding drought tolerance and shortstop. There's just a treated, untreated. You can see on the tree on the left showing the signs of entering that permanent wilting point where you have desiccation of the foliage. The treated tree on the right is not showing those symptoms. This is more to show the effect of paclobutrazol on the density of foliage. You can see how stacked up the internodes are on this 9-bark shrub. These are some photos from a red oak that I treated. I think I did this last fall of 2016. So on the top, I treated that tree in the fall of 16, and I took this clipping in the summer of 2017. I have it highlighted in maroon, the tip growth from this season, versus an untreated red oak on the same property, and there's the tip growth from the 2017 season. So huge difference in the amount of growth that was put on. If you look just at that treated tree, I can measure back on the bud scars, and that blue is last year's growth, or the 2016 growth, and it's roughly 10 inches in growth, compared to the current year growth, which is only 4 inches perhaps. And if you look at the internodes, where the leaves are coming off of the stem, you can see how stacked up everything is. And so the tree is still putting on the same amount of foliage. Everything just gets stacked up. And so when you look at it from the overhead view, you can see just how much denser and also darker green and prettier those leaves are. Again, I said shortstop enhances chlorophyll production. Chlorophyll is what makes trees green. And so typically a tree that's treated with shortstop is going to be denser and darker green. Just like hydrotane, there's a lot of different opportunities and uses for shortstop besides drought stress. I think it's an awesome tool for that, but there's lots of different places to use this stuff. You've got pre and post construction programs. If you have trees that are growing in a limited root zone, so that picture of a sidewalk tree, that tree is probably a little bit too large for the situation, but had shortstop been utilized there, it's going to limit the growth of that trunk, and so it's going to keep that tree smaller and more manageable and extend out the useful life of a tree that's growing in a sidewalk. It's also going to help alleviate a lot of the stress that that tree is incurring from the heat and lack of water that it's getting in its growing site. You can use it on trees that are declining, mature trees that you just want to keep healthy, street trees, trees that are growing near structures. You can prune them back, treat them with shortstop, and then you won't have to prune them but once every 3 or 4 years. If you just want to maintain a manicured appearance, like on ornamentals, you just want to kind of lock something down. Chlorosis. Chlorosis is the lack of chlorophyll in a tree. So using shortstop will help stimulate more chlorophyll production. Talked about drought, and interestingly enough, bacterial leaf scorch. So BLS is a pathogen that inhibits the movement of water inside of a tree. Using shortstop, making that tree more drought tolerant, will alleviate the symptoms of BLS. It is not doing anything to that pathogen. All it is doing is helping that tree regulate its water better, and so those scorch symptoms are not nearly as bad. And it also persists for 3 years, so it's a really good long-term management tool for drought and BLS. So to kind of sum up these agronomic tools we've talked about in mitigating drought stress, most physiological processes within trees and plants are dependent on water. When trees get dehydrated, they start to shut down and become susceptible to secondary pathogens like wood borers, and in Texas, hypoxylin canker. Back in 2011, hypoxylin canker flared up all across the state, and it caused a lot of trees to die. If you're going to water trees, it's important to understand the amount of volume that's required. They require 10 gallons of water per diameter inch of trunk per watering. And so in summertime, that means doing a deep watering every 5 to 7 days. And I like to use that number, 10 gallons per diameter inch, because it can give a homeowner an idea. If you tell a homeowner that their 12-inch tree needs 120 gallons of water every time they water it, they're going to say, wow, that's a lot of water. And that might prompt them to actually use a soaker hose or use a spot sprinkler or saturate the soil somehow. If you want to use these agronomic products, it's important to understand how they are used. So you can apply hydrotane to increase the water availability. This is your short-term solution that lasts for 90 days. It's a very good solution for the short term. Or you can apply shortstop or both in tandem to help trees recover from drought injury or protect them from long-term drought stress. So in California, where they've been dealing with drought for several years now, I have to say using shortstop would be a great tool out there. With shortstop, again, you're going to increase root development, thicken the leaf cuticles, reduce the size of the leaves and the stomates, and increase the production of abscisic acid. So you're helping that tree fight drought on a physiological level. There is no other treatment that you can do that is going to mimic what happens with shortstop. All right, guys, this is my Jerry Maguire moment right here. Help me help you. Arborjet, we pride ourselves on our customer service. We want you to call us. If you need help with something, pick up the phone, guys. Here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me. If you can't get me, call the main office. We also have a vast network of people that do the same job as me, all the regional technical managers. Here they are. If you don't know your RTM, get to know them. Our job is literally to help you be successful with our products. So please give us a call if you need help with something. We'd love to help you out. All right, guys. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to stop the recording.